All right, everybody. Final session of the day. As an intro, since I haven't been up here yet, my name's Alex. I run product marketing on Mark's team here at UserEvidence. Thank you all so much for being here today.
One of the things that kind of stood out to me, there's a lot of experimentation going on right now. I think I counted maybe 47 tools and vendors that I had never heard of in the presentations today that all sound incredibly promising. Does that mean that you should all go try 47 tools tomorrow? Probably not. So let me talk a little bit about the market environment that we're in. I think, with more choice and increasing complexity, it's gotten complicated to decide what is right for you. And your tool stack at Docebo, thank you, Kyle, for helping me get the pronunciation right on that one, should look very different than a Series A startup like PortPro. So I don't think there's an objective best vendor anymore in each space. I think there's a much more nuanced question of what is the right vendor for me in my unique scenario. And that unique scenario changes dramatically depending on your size, the conditions of your market, the persona that you sell to, the money that you have, the regions that you're in, whatever. There's 47 different parameters that are going to differentiate what tool is right for you. So I think we've all done a pretty good job from a brand perspective of building that brand trust. I don't think that buyers, especially if you had a decent sized company, especially if it's a public company, I don't think there's any doubt that we recognize that you're just overall a good company. You have 25 amazing big logos on there, some great polished case studies. We've all figured out how to get a 4.825 on G2 now and kind of gain that. So that's not much of a differentiator. But I don't think we have a problem there. Obviously, that's hugely important in today's market. There's a lot of research that's pointing to buyers are kind of fleeing to these, especially in the enterprise, buyers are fleeing to these perceived safer enterprises, the ones that get highly ranked in the Gartner report, just because someone else has done the work for them to figure out if they're a decent vendor. But I think the much more interesting problem, once you pass that bar of, okay, we're in the conversation. And again, if you're not there, you have some big problems, but let's assume that we're there. We're in the conversation now. They're looking at 6 other vendors that are all saying we're the best, and they're all slightly different. They all have their pros and cons. I think the nuanced question that we're having a hard time building confidence in prospects is, do I really trust that this company has delivered success over and over in this exact same scenario? Yesterday we were out riding horses, and this is a 1,000-pound animal. I think Mark Huber, this was your first time on a horse, is that correct? Yeah, and so your logical human brain would be like, well, this is probably pretty dangerous. That's a 1,000-pound wild animal. It's not good. But the guys that we were with and the ladies that we were with, true cowboys, they looked the part. They had done this thousands of times, and that establishes the trust to be able to climb on this 1,000-pound animal. And so that's really what prospects are searching for is, do I believe that you've done this before and you're going to take care of me and you're going to deliver strong ROI when I make this decision? So the reality, though, is that there is a gap. There is a gap between all these fantastic things that you claim that you can do and what skeptical, jaded prospects believe that you can do. And so we call this gap the evidence gap. And we have a lot of research that digs into why it's there, how it's comprised, and Alex can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's the name we've given to this actual tangible problem, because trust obviously is this important but amorphous concept, right? Like, I can look at someone and trust them for a variety of different reasons, but how does that actually impact the deals that are happening? How does that impact pipeline? What does that actually look like? And this is a report we did last year. The new one is coming out very soon, I believe the next month. Jillian nods. Yep. And this is new data from the new report. Some of this hasn't changed, but some of it is interesting for this new world, especially with AI this year. So over half of sellers, this number stayed similar to last year, have had a deal stall because of a lack of evidence, a lack of the right evidence, right? And the issue is, and how that leads into the right number, is 67% of buyers, 2/3 have actually disqualified a vendor on their own because they've not been able to provide the right evidence as well. The scary part about that 2/3 number is we likely don't know about that, right? That's not something that's showing up necessarily in the deal. That's that quiet decision that's happening in the background that we may never know about, that actually is getting us off the table or not even in the conversation before we know it. So that's the danger of what this looks like. It is those deals slowed down, even if it seemed like the conversation was going well. It's not being able to answer the right questions from your sales team, right? There are a lot of different ways that this gap shows itself tangibly. And some of these ways, there we go, uh, are related to how these fancy tactics won't save us from a much more core problem in our marketing, right? So when you look at, as a product marketer, myself, all these core issues when it comes to messaging, positioning, and email, right, that a rep is sending are all related to that trust. I grew up on the Seth Godin School of Marketing, and it's the permission marketing one. I'm not that young myself, but his big phrase that's always stuck with me throughout my whole career is people like us do things like this, right? And I actually like to preempt that when I talk to our sales team and say people like us buy things like this because that's our whole job as marketers is simply to show who we're for, what we do, and why we do it well for them. And so if you have, for example, the wrong folks coming inbound, that means there's a mismatch in who you're actually saying you're for, right? Very clear way to define that. If deals are stalling because you're unable to show or answer that particular question, right? Then you don't have what you need to get it done. And a lot of these, again, AI outbound is not going to fix that. All these fancy tools, that trust coming from all of that and what you have with what we believe is customer proof is what's actually going to be the fuel for that fire to be able to tell the right story and the right message. And so that leads us into something that we believe is timeless, right? Because we've all been through changes in the market. AI is just another one, even though it is a massive change. It is not the first change we've all been through. It won't be the last. But there is a timeless concept that we all believe will forever impact what we do in marketing. And that is that concept of customer proof.
Yeah, I actually think the advent of AI and the increase in sophistication of tools makes this problem a lot more important. So, for example, we know that a lot of buyers now are using generative AI search, right, to search for vendors, but also help in the evaluation, right? And so, unlike the 10 years ago Google days where it's just best vendor in this category, your search, say it's Claude or something like that, already has a ton of context on what's going on in your company, your own unique challenges and stuff like that. So it's becoming more of a consultative assistant that can really help you in deciding what's right for you. Another example are these, displayed ABM pages for a particular account, right? You can spin these things up now in 10 minutes. Here's an account exactly for you. But the problem then becomes what content and proof are we going to show? If we have 16 different industry verticals times 17 different regions and 6 competitors, there's a lot of different permutations in this matrix of trying to give relevant content to specific people. So while the concept is not a novel one, yes, obviously we should go show customers because customers are the best sellers. The way we've been going about it is starting to break a little bit. I think there's reasons for this that are totally valid. A lot of your customers are larger enterprises, and who's tried to go get a case study from like JP Morgan or federal government and it kind of sits there for 5 to 6 months, and then legal kind of makes it this vanilla Swiss cheese that eventually ends up like, they're a great partner or just doesn't happen at all. It's frustrating, right? There's amazing asset what you have. I would argue probably the most important asset in your company beyond your people is this huge base of users and customers that you have. But there's a ton of friction in the way of unlocking stories and proof and advocates from this amazing customer base. And it might be because of legal PR, they don't want to speak out, or it's just too much effort to go through an interview or a full case study. But that is the asset that will really be what we need to move into this market, this new world where prospects really expect a very high bar of substantive evidence and relevant proof. So user evidence has obviously been dead center in this problem. We've traditionally been focused on how do we harness the voice of the customer to create content and proof points and evidence. But today we're taking this further. How can we, in a more holistic way, elegantly orchestrate and engage advocates to make them sellers at every point in the buyer's journey? And so we're super excited to announce that we've acquired Zealot, and I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. And we've also raised $7 million to do this. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what Zealot is and why we acquired them. So Zealot really has functionality in 2 key areas for us. One is called advocate engagement or activation. So even for user evidence, traditionally we would do surveys and we would identify advocates that were willing to do reference and advocacy activities, speak at an event, talk to a salesperson, talk to media. But that's kind of where we stop. Here's 150 people that raise their hand. You kind of go do your thing with them. But when you have a larger customer base and you might have hundreds or thousands of customers, there's a lot of method to the madness in how you organize your advocates, how you get them to do acts of advocacy on your behalf, how you make sure that you're not burning them out and asking them to do 5 things in the same week. And so Zealot has really impressive functionality there, as well as reference management. In the larger enterprise, if you sell deals that are above 50K or so, there's still a lot of instances where prospects are going to want to talk to a live customer. And so how do you put the right customer on the phone with that prospect that's actually going to perform? How do you, again, manage burnout so that you're not overusing your customers? So this is where Zealot really shines. In terms of why Zealot as the people, young team, and we're not like super old either, but like that grind and hustle is hard to bottle. We kind of joke that these guys just like pound Red Bull and build features. Brandon, who's got a flu and fever right now, is shipping features at 3 a.m. last night and telling us, hey, this cool stuff is ready. And their AI native approach, I think, to building software is a little bit different, where they're just kind of born in this AI era and are very familiar with that tool set. So we love their energy. They're just a phenomenal product and engineering minded group when paired with our decent brand and relatively mature go-to-market engine. Ray and I are former salespeople, so we're okay at selling. Was just an amazing combo, and specifically our space. Customer marketing. A lot of folks know that our customer marketers here been a little bit of like a challenging function that like hasn't quite like got to the level of like a full function that has a seat at the executive table. There's not a ton of VPs of customer marketing. There are folks like Kevin and Jillian that have made it and are building these much larger functions where customer marketing includes voice of customer, advocacy, lifecycle marketing, and I do believe that's the future. But the vendor ecosystem has been relatively kind of small and fractured. We're the largest vendor in the space, which is kind of hilarious. We're 45 people Series A, so it's all relative. There's been some bigger players in the space, like Influitive, my old company, Tech Validate, that I've kind of exited in one way or another, and a bunch of startups. But there's never been a true platform that covers these major 3 areas of customer advocacy and marketing: content and evidence and proof creation, advocate engagement, and reference management. So yeah, we're super excited to bring it all together. There's a ton of advantages, which I'll talk a little bit about more in a second, but we're super excited.
Yeah, and it's about bringing that proof throughout the full funnel. So now, with the suite of different offerings that we have available through it, these things overlap, and we're excited about how they work together. And he put it really well at that very first sense, where it starts now with Zealot where user evidence used to end. We can now be a source for your advocate pool identifying. And it also fits in with this idea of verified and proving and trust, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We all trust each other in this room. And it's the same thing for our customers and our buyers the same way. Just like we're peers in this room, and it's funky because we're in MarTech and we're all peers. So it all works in this case. But the same idea holds for your customers, no matter what industry you're in, right? Everyone's looking for those peers. And we can connect it also with long form research, which we'll talk about in a bit, in a way that's also verified to own the story and the problem as marketers, not just the solution itself. So we want to talk through some of the specific ways that we're excited about how this will come into play for our customers and marketers in general in the future, for how proof can now actually be executed across the entire funnel of your go-to-market, and how that impacts your story that you can actually tell as marketers. So the first is obviously with our strength, which is customer proof. This always has been. This content is extremely important. We have a lot of product marketers in the room. I'm a product marketer. I know when I joined UserEvidence a year and a half ago, I kind of had this moment. One, I got humbled by Evan because I had to retrain myself on actually having this stuff available. I was used to sending the new survey for every single launch, for begging CS for a customer, all of that good stuff. And then I went into CS asking for my first launch for an example. And then Evan pops in with 2 links to testimonials and stuff we already had ready. So that was a good learning moment. But this verified evidence is something that we've put 5 years of work into at this point. And we're not obviously stopping there. We're investing more into this. And so This is an example of what our customers have started to do, which leads us into this next phase of what customer evidence will be as a part of our platform. And so you see Gong, you see Huntress, who's in the security space as well, and Ripen with some examples of what they put directly on their website for verified customer proof. Gong has over 3,000 assets in their library. And so now they have that as a direct customer proof page on their website that anyone can go talk to. You can talk to AI as a buyer, ask questions about their customers and the proof, and if it's a fit for you, and essentially be talking to an aggregated view of their customers through all the assets that they have and the feedback. And that's not just testimonials, that's the stats, that's the charts, that's the actual research that you can gather from your customers. Everyone loves benchmarking, hearing what their peers are doing, right? So customer evidence isn't just about that, yay, we love them, they're so great and awesome. I love Ian, I couldn't live without him on the CS team, right? It's more about what are you actually doing in your job day to day that you can share across the customer base. Like your customers are a source for that type of information and marketing because marketing is supposed to be helping, right? At the end of the day, it's us helping our customers, and you have access to the best source possible in your customers of knowledge, and they all want to help each other. So that's a way that customer evidence is not just those testimonials, just those stats about the product, but it can also be delivered as insights for the rest of your customers as well. And it's all verified, of course. That most important thing about why we research is so important to us here is because that trust piece. Now, we have an amazing group of marketers in the room today, so no one is doing crappy stuff and making stuff up in this room, but like that is what the reputation is, like it or not. And so having that substantiated evidence is really important, and having that mark is important to us as a brand so that people can say, hey, they work with UE and that is a trustworthy piece of content that I know they actually said and that person is actually a customer. It may seem like basics that you should always have and should be trusted, but at the end of the day in the market, that actually is something that's been super important to our customers so far. So where do we take this into the future? It really is all about telling that exact right story and the exact right time. So something new that's coming out very soon is what we're calling proof pages, right? And if you have a huge library of assets and different things that you can take advantage of in different contexts, you want to be able to find all that, put it all together into the exact right story. So for that new product launch, for that particular persona, right? For that new industry you're trying to break into, how do you tell that exact right story for that exact right group and embed that in a way that looks great in your website, send directly through your salesperson, whatever it might be, right? We're always trying to tell that exact right story, and we're building the tools to make sure that you can gather all of that information and deliver it in the way that your prospects and your marketers and sellers will actually use and want.
Yeah, one of the cool things about these is like, someone mentioned the advent of generative or GEO, LEO, AIEO, or whatever we call it, but basically how you show up in AI search. AI search really prioritizes trusted sources. So independent third-party research, customer reviews is a huge one, right? And so one of the interesting things about user evidence is you're not only collecting novel research that's independently verified by user evidence through surveys, but we're also bringing in customer feedback from other sources, which might be Gong calls, it might be GT reviews, it might be existing content that you already have. So being able to spin up a proof page around, how we deliver success for healthcare customers, that's going to show up in a much more discrete and targeted way for AI-based search. When someone's like, what's the right vendor for me and I'm healthcare, they find these pages. So I think the other concept that's really interesting is like we talk a lot about turning your customers into sellers, but it's not practical, obviously, to take your best customers and make them account executives. You could. So creating an abstracted pool of wisdom that kind of represents the collective voice of potentially thousands of users so that prospects can actually, in an abstract, almost synthetic context, talk to customers, right? If you get to a website and you see the drift bot, rather than talking to sales, why not talk to customers? It's a much more credible source. So bringing that customer proof earlier in the funnel is a big objective for us.
And we talked about the fuel for your fire, right? I'm not saying not to do AI outbound, not saying not to do all of these things, but the evidence that you have from your customers, that is your talk track. That is the thing that could be the creative on that ad or in that email. That's the thing that's going to make the difference, that's actually going to resonate with your customers. And so again, we're not ending anymore at just the customer evidence piece, right? You find all those hand raisers maybe in a user evidence survey, and now you can actually track them as a part of that advocate pool, centralize that all together, and then now activate them for missions to do all sorts of different types of advocate activities, reward them. Of course, whether you like to gamify or not, rewarding is extremely important to show your appreciation for that participation. So that full cycle of advocacy from, identification and proactive identification as well, through actually activating for all those different mission types, and then end in the reward, as well as some community pieces to let them share with each other. That is where we're excited about that full cycle of actual advocacy. Because if you think about it, customer evidence is an active advocacy, right? This isn't necessarily a disparate process altogether. There's overlap all through and between it. It's all the same world of what you are actually activating your customers to be able to do with you and building that relationship with them. And one thing that's really important, actually, as a part of this that we've seen as this decision was made, as we're getting even more into this customer marketing and advocacy space, is that focus solely, and we talked about this a bit at my roundtable table, that focus on marketers and sellers as kind of the like end, consumer of this. And it's actually not how we want to think about it. Very few folks in the space so far, and vendors and solutions, have been able to actually focus on the advocate and the buyer as their experience is the one that matters the most in this. And how does it actually build the relationship with the advocate versus just getting the seller what they need? And that one reference call for that deal, it's actually, how does that reference feel? How does the buyer feel talking to that reference? Is that an easy process for them? So that mindset for how we approach advocacy is going to be something that's really important to us as we continue building in this space, and will kind of be a core tenet for us. And I mentioned references as one of those advocate activities. And this is, again, a full workflow of what we're going to be able to do. Some of my favorite of the actual AI functionality lives in some of this space where, again, as a part of building that relationship, a big part of that is not using those same three references over and over and over and over again, which is what we all see and use all of the time, especially when sales is going behind your back to get that reference. So something that I'm really excited about as well, is the AI matchmaking feature that is available, right? So sales can put in that request. I need someone in enterprise and healthcare tomorrow. And then they can go through all of the different data sources, not just what you might have in particular in your CRM, which can be brought in to read, their customer stage and all of that stuff. But what was that person's answers on their UE surveys? Also, there's a lot more detailed data that you can bring into the equation to match if they're a good fit. And obviously those key things like segment, right, are kind of the bare bones check mark. You got to have that dialed. But when it comes to that person, are they a fan of us? Have they recently done a reference? Of course. We have a burnout score in there. That's really exciting to say, hey, even if they're the perfect fit, we're going to not score them as high because it matters that we don't ask the same person over and over again. And it will also help you, identify new references that you may not have thought of that could be a great fit for that. So the full workflow all the way through the meeting itself, the call coordination, and having that done and knowing that it was completed is going to be available. And really excited about, again, not just what that can do for centralizing all this in one place for our marketers, but again, the experience that the advocates and that your buyers actually have throughout the experience as well.
Yeah, and a big part of one of customer marketing's challenges over the years has been proving their value, right? What is the value of a case study? And we've gotten okay at kind of some squishy influence type metrics, but I think we really want to get closer to how are we influencing, measurable pipeline and ultimately close dollars. And that was functionality that Zealot had that we were really impressed with. But just one example of that, where there's a really good intersection, is customer content and proof and references are not totally distinct concepts, right? They're just different formats for delivering the voice of the customer, and they are on a spectrum. So why that matters, traditionally technology is I need a reference, and we would go and try to match them with a reference. But a lot of times, like especially in a smaller deal, imagine you have a 20K deal on some high velocity product, sales ask for a reference or prospect ask for a reference because that's just the term they're familiar with when they're essentially saying, hey, I need some proof that this is going to work for someone like me. Putting references and content and proof on that same path. So you can say, hey, here's, we can get you to a reference and a very relevant one, but also here's 16 proof points from someone in your industry that was evaluating this exact competitor and why they chose. And what we're finding is a lot of times, especially on smaller deals, that suffices. And you can deflect this reference call that didn't need to happen, which just helps you manage reference burnout and helps you increase deal velocity. So lots of exciting stuff there. I think one of our big differentiators that Alex hit on a little bit that we highlight through our research is this element of UserEvidence being positioned as this independent, unbiased, third-party research firm, somewhat analogous to like an analyst firm like a Gartner or Forrester or JD Powers in the consumer world, where we can stand behind this data and say, hey, this isn't just the marketer at the vendor making stuff up. This is real data that we've captured from customers that we've verified, and we can validate that these are actually the data points coming back. So one part of our business has been doing a lot of these longer format research reports, which really take two flavors. One is an ROI study. Sam, I'm looking at you. You've done several of these at Recorded Future Security Company. But this is very similar to, folks are familiar, like a Forrester Total Economic Impact report, minus the $150,000 price tag. But and plus, oftentimes a lot more substantive data set. You might have hundreds or thousands of customers that are responding to user evidence surveys, which is a lot more substantive research than, handpicking 3 customers. So ROI studies are a great way to prove the value of your product in a late stage funnel context. And then we also have more industry trends or panel-based market research thought leadership reports, where we're providing a panel of non-customers, maybe 500 IT directors, and we're asking them questions around how AI is going to impact their function to create the 2025 state of AI in whatever space. These are really great for big rock, top of the funnel content offers, AR, PR, content, demand generation, kind of owning thought leadership around the problem. So we now have solutions that really create credible content, throughout the whole funnel.
The thing I love about this and how it kind of ties into everything else is, as marketers, we want to own the problem and the solution. We've always just owned the solution, but if you can actually become a face for the problem that your buyers are facing and help with that and provide peer data of what people think, how they're dealing with it, that becomes also the trusted place you go to for that type of news, that type of information about what's just happening in the market itself. And so then you actually own both sides of the equation, which is really exciting and also valuable for your buyers as well. And so as we work through this cycle and what it looks like with advocacy and content and all of that, what does closing the evidence gap look like? Because it's not just in marketing. And this is where, as a product marketer and customer marketers as well, we're constantly working with all the different departments. And this starts impacting all these different departments. And the big key for customer marketers that we're really excited about is that you truly become the steward for the most important asset in the company, which is your customers, right? That is your lifeblood. No one would argue that. But customer marketing becomes the hub for that because of all the ways in which advocacy can help the company, whether it's sign up for a beta program with product and actually give feedback on something before it comes out, or join your customer advisory board, or speak at an event like this. There is way more than just customer evidence when it comes to advocacy. And I think branching out that idea of how it actually impacts the business as a whole, from strategic decisions and feedback through content and campaigns, that's where a major difference is actually going to take root, and where customer marketing can be a hub of that by owning this entire cycle and being the source for both those insights and content, whatever it might be.
So yeah, I wanted to do a little exercise to think about just what this looks like in the future. Someone had a good point. I think when you're interviewing candidates, Sylvia, what does it look like 3 or 4 years from now? So we thought about this exercise, and I really thought about it from the lens of a buyer. I mean, a lot of you, hopefully, are buyers, and we got to pay for our event next year, Mark. Um, so you've been in those shoes. I mean, in my opinion, like, gosh, it would be lovely. Like, we don't do all these demos and business cases and justifications, and like whoever said 155 people now in the Gartner evaluation cycle. We don't do all this for fun, right? We're trying to choose the right solution with the idea that can help us, and we're trying to get confidence that it's the right solution. So ideally, if I was a buyer, I would love if vendors just had a much more transparent view of, here's where we're good, here's where we're not. Here's exactly like people that look like you. You can talk to them if you want. I think I don't expect vendors to be 100% transparent and show everything. Obviously, we're a little sensitive around showing, negative feedback from customers. But relative to where we're at now, which is this very kind of varnished, almost Instagram, like, here's our top moments and shots. Like, that's all we show. I would love to get to a point where it's just a much more diverse, transparent representation of our customers in a substantive way. And so what I'd love to see is that voice of the customer really brought forward in the sales process. If I can figure out early, from customers, if I'm the right fit for this vendor, that saves me a ton of time and is going to really inspire confidence. So I'm really excited about this concept of how do we harness the voice of our customers, but actually bring that into outbound prospecting, bring that into experiences on our website where people prospects can actually interact with customers. I think we've saved customer proof for this last stage in the funnel. Only when they hit stage 5, you're going to be able to talk to customers. There's now an opportunity to really bring that forward much earlier to build trust and credibility throughout the buyer cycle. That's it.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. This is super exciting. We had a great time this week. Hope you did too. More fun to be had. All right, boost. Woo.